Hello everybody, Mike Westfall here at McDonald Garden Center. Sorry about our delay, we had some technical difficulties, so hopefully we have figured those out. But I'm here to tell you a little bit about soil. So I know that sounds like it might be a slightly boring topic, but I'll try and keep it as exciting as I possibly can. Let me tell you just a little bit about what we're doing here. So we do free seminars, educational series throughout the entire year, and we're going to continue to do those. We're just going to do them here with Facebook Live. As we know, these are difficult times and we're being asked to stay indoors, and we definitely are recommending that. But we want to continue to educate you and continue to tell you about all the different things that are happening in gardening. And so we've got a lot of educational series coming up. We're going to be doing these every Wednesday and Friday at 11 o'clock, so we're really excited about that. Next week we've got one on April 8th, I believe, on Grow Your Own Food. And then we've got one that Friday, April 10th, on gardening for small spaces, which also I'll do a container, so I'll get to plant up something in front of you and you can see what I'm doing. And then there's more to come after that. We're going to be doing birding as well as butterfly gardening. So really exciting series coming up. Check out our website. We'll be continuing to update that as we continue to get more suggestions. If you have suggestions of things that you want, let us know. So thank you again for joining us. My name is Mike Westfall. I've been with McDonald Garden Center for 17 years now. I graduated from James Madison University and in business management. Didn't really want a serious job, so I went into landscape, and I've worked in every department. I've run some stores, I've done some buying, I do a lot of different things, and now people have kind of dubbed me the garden guru. So I'm here to help you, and I'm here to educate and just get you excited about soil. I know that sounds kind of like a boring topic, but it is very interesting. There's so much to learn about soil, and I always tell people it's very important to invest some in your soil. If you're going to be buying plants and investing money in these plants like shrubs and trees and perennials into your vegetable garden, it's very important to know about the soil and where the plant is going to live. You know, its entire lifetime is going to live in that soil, so it's very important to encourage a healthy soil environment, and that's what we're going to talk about today. McDonald Garden Center has been here for 75 years in Hampton Roads, so we know our soil very well. We've been doing it for a long time, and our amazing staff here is here to help you and educate you as well. So want to let you know that we're here for you during these difficult times. Our store is open. We're open 9 to 6. You know, we're an essential business. So we still encourage you to come in if you feel comfortable coming in, and we're here to help. We're open all week long, so you got plenty of time to come in. If you want to come in during later hours or earlier hours, we are doing everything to keep this place as safe as we possibly can. We are cleaning every surface periodically throughout the day, and we're keeping social distancing. I think that's the most important thing, is we're practicing social distancing. We're staying 6 feet away. We encourage our customers to do the same. We don't want you to think we're avoiding you. We're not avoiding you. We're just trying to keep a safe distance, and we can still communicate from that distance. So let's get to soil. So as I mentioned, soil is, it can sound very boring and can be very scientific and can be kind of, you know, on and on and on. But I'm going to keep it real simple and just kind of explain the basic things that you need to know about soil in this area. If you've lived in Hampton Roads, if you've been digging in your yard and you've been working in your soil, you know that our soil can be sometimes tough. We have a lot of clay. We've also got some sand. So if you're down closer to the beach, you might have a very sandy soil. If you're a little bit more inland, you're probably going to have a clay. You might have run across the hard brick red clay. You might see some of that gray sticky clay. Lots of different things that we experience in our soil. Some of you might have great soil. You know, a lot of people, when they build houses, especially if you live in a newer home, they typically strip all that good dirt off the top. All that topsoil they take off, and they kind of leave you with what's left over. So sometimes our soil isn't very great, and so that's what we're going to talk about, is how to enrich your soil and make it a little bit better to grow healthy plants in it, and really encourage, you know, a great success in any gardening activity that you might have. So first, I like to talk about our pH. pH, a lot of people, when they think about a soil test, you can get a soil test that has everything about your nitrogen, your phosphorus, potassium, all the different nutrients that are in your soil. But really the most important thing, I think, is pH. pH is a range, is a scale from 14 to basically 0. But 7 is neutral, and 7 is where you would kind of like to be for most things. Our soil in this area is a 5.5. If you're dealing with shrubs, in this area, a lot of the shrubs that we're going to carry naturally grow in acidic soil. So you think of azaleas, camellias, rhododendrons, hydrangeas, those different types of plants. They all can grow in a very low pH. And naturally our soil in this area is typically about a 5.5, maybe a 6, somewhere in that range. But it's good to know your pH and know what you're growing. So if you ever want to do a pH test, we do them for free right here in the store. We do them right when you bring it in at our Independence location or our Great Neck location, our year-round stores. We can do a pH test for you. It's free for our Garden Rewards customers. If you're not a Garden Rewards customer, sign up. It's free. It's a great program, but we just want to be able to communicate with you, and that's a great program to do that. If you bring in a small sample, we don't need a whole lot. We just need a little tiny bag, maybe a couple spoonfuls. We can do a nice pH test for you. We can do it right on the spot. If you're doing your lawn, if you're doing shrubs, if you're doing a vegetable garden, it's very important to kind of know your pH, because at the right pH is where the plant can naturally get nutrients out of the soil itself. It's not going to, you still are going to want to fertilize, and we'll talk about fertilization here in a little bit and feeding your plants. But you won't have to worry too much about if the plant's getting it. So a great way to explain that is a lawn. So a lot of people think about lawns. A 6.5 is like ideal range for most lawns. At a 6.5, the grass can get the nutrients out of the soil. So we all fertilize our lawns. And if you put down a fertilizer in a lawn that has a lower pH than a 6.5, let's say it's 5.5, then you're only getting about 50% of the benefit of that fertilizer. The actual root system can't get to those nutrients. So that's why we encourage a pH test, so we know your pH, and that way it unlocks the potential of your soil, and it unlocks the ability for the plants to get all the fertilizer. And that way you're not wasting money and you're not wasting fertilizer, because the plant can't get to it. So pH is very, very important. So then I want to talk about soil amendments. If you ever have heard the word amendment, you might be like, I don't know what that is. Soil amendments are very important. As I mentioned, we have a lot of clay and sandy soil in this area. So you definitely are going to want to amend that. And I'll talk about a couple different amendments. One of the most important ones in this area is compost. Organic matter. So organic matter is what we typically lack in our soil, especially when you talk about clay-based soils and even sandy soils. Organic matter is, old or broken down leaf matter, different type of vegetative plants, lots of different wood and bark material. So those are all organic matter that's broken down. And there's lots of different types of compost. We have our own McDonald compost, which is, broken down, basically almost like mulch that hasn't been aged in a mulch style, but has been broken down to provide a nice rich soil that is basically continue to decompose over time. And in that decomposition process, it's going to release nutrients. It's also going to help hold in moisture, and it's going to break apart your soil. So compost is super, super important, whether you're doing lawn, trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, fruits, vegetables, anything. It's our number one recommended soil amendment. So we've got our McDonald compost, we've got McGill compost, which I don't know if you've been around in Hampton Roads for a while. It used to be called Nutri-Green compost. Very, very good compost. We've also got Espoma compost. We've got Espoma Land and Sea, which has a little bit of crab and lobster shells mixed into it. And then it's got a lot of the forest aged products and humus. And then cow manure compost. We have an Espoma cow manure compost that's really, really nice. And then we've got mushroom compost as well. So mushroom compost comes from the mushroom farmers that are growing mushrooms, and they can only use the soil once or twice. And once it's depleted of its nutrients, they've got to get rid of it. But it's still a very, very good soil. It's a very, very rich compost that we can use in gardening. It just can't grow mushrooms anymore. So that is a great amendment. So there's lots of different types of compost, and you can do composting in your own yard, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that later. And then of course there's perlite. So perlite is another one of my favorite soil amendments. Perlite is those little white styrofoamy things you see in potting soils, but perlite is a mineral. Basically it's volcanic glass. So again, not to get too into the science part of it, but it's basically a volcanic mineral, and it's got moisture in it, and they fire it at a very, very high temperature, and then it pops like a piece of popcorn. And that's where you get that little perlite. And what's so great about perlite is it breaks up your soil, and it allows air and moisture to get down through the soil. It allows root systems to work its way through the soil. So it's one of my favorite soil amendments, along with compost. So if you ever bought a tree or shrub from us before and you ask us, hey, what should I plant this with? We're almost always going to say compost and perlite. Those are our kind of two recommendations. And we'll talk about planting here in a little bit. But perlite is amazing. It lasts for a very, very long time in the soil. There's lots of different grades. We carry a medium grade. It's very easy to use, and it lasts a very long time. There's also vermiculite. So vermiculite is kind of similar to perlite, kind of does the same thing. Vermiculite helps break apart your soil. It allows air to get down in there, allows the root system to take, allow moisture to percolate through the soil. So vermiculite is just another kind of form of perlite. It's slightly different. It actually has a little bit more water holding capacity. So if you've got a sandier soil, you might use vermiculite. If you've experienced your plants are drying out a little bit more, maybe in a raised bed garden, you might consider vermiculite. Vermiculite's a little bit more expensive. It's a little bit harder to get, but it's basically the same thing. It's a mineral. It's got moisture in it. They fire it, and it pops, and it forms this kind of little accordion looking thing. But it's a great soil amendment. It's just another option. And then there's peat moss. So peat moss is a great one for if you've got sandy soil. Peat moss holds in moisture. So, peat moss comes from a moss bog garden, basically. So as these mosses grow over time, these bogs basically build up with this huge layer of moss, and they go in there and they harvest it. And it's just a great soil amendment. You're going to see it a lot in potting soils. Potting soils are going to have a lot of peat moss, compost, vermiculite, perlite. They're going to be a mixture of everything. We'll talk about that here in a minute too. But peat moss you can get by yourself, or just by itself. And all of these products you can. So peat moss is usually sold in a bale form, so you're going to get like a 1 cubic foot bale. You can also get in a small 8-quart bag. But peat moss is great if you've got a dry condition. Maybe you've been trying to plant underneath a couple trees for a few years and you're having a tough time doing that. Peat moss might be a great option to help hold some moisture in around that root system. It's also great for sandy soil. So if you're growing in a sandy condition, it'll help with that as well. And then there's topsoil. So topsoil, of course, is topsoil. It's real dirt. So when you put down topsoil, you might be using that if you're trying to grade your yard. Maybe you've got hills and valleys or dips, or maybe you accidentally went off your driveway and you've got a little rut that you need to fill. You want to fill that with topsoil. And topsoil, you can actually bring it up to grade, maybe go just slightly above so it gets compacted over time. It'll kind of level out. But that's what topsoil is mainly used for. Now, I'll talk about topsoil a little bit more later, but topsoil is basically minerals and sand and basically organic matter that is decomposed to a certain degree, a certain level that it's not decomposing much anymore. But that's basically what topsoil is. Topsoil, you're going to put down an inch and you're going to get an inch. So that's what's really good about topsoil and kind of knowing that. You don't want to plant in straight topsoil if you're doing raised bed gardening, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. So first, let me talk about planting a shrub. So shrubs and trees are going to be in your landscape for a long time, and so it's very valuable to invest a little bit in that soil. And so what we're always gonna recommend in this area is we're gonna first ask you, what kind of soil do you have? If you don't know, we're almost gonna assume that it's clay-based. Clay is best way to describe the difference between clay and sand. Is sand, imagine a bunch of volleyballs or beach balls in a big bin. Lots of air pockets, lots of holes, lots of ways for the water to get through, and that's why sand dries out fast. And then imagine clay. So clay is a soil that's like golf balls. So imagine a big bin full of golf balls. You're not going to get your hand through there. Not a lot of pockets. Very tight, very heavy. So clay is not a bad soil. Sand is not a bad soil. You just need to amend it. So going back to the planting of trees or shrubs or perennials, we're almost going to always recommend for a clay soil to recommend compost and perlite. And the best way to do that is to mix a third, and a third. A third of your soil, you definitely want to use your soil because it's going to live in your soil, so it needs to get used to it. So you don't want to just dig a hole, plant your plant, and then backfill with really perfect soil because eventually it's going to hit that side wall of your soil, which might be a heavy clay, and it's going to think that it's in a pot maybe, and the roots are going to hit the side of that clay wall, and then they're just going to wrap, and they'll wrap and wrap and wrap, and 2 or 3 years later, all of a sudden the tree or shrub dies. And so that's unfortunate. So we don't want to encourage you putting a perfect mix just right around the plant. We need to use your soil. The plant needs to get used to it. So what we will recommend is digging a hole, putting your soil off to the side, put a little bit of compost in it, put a little bit of perlite into it, mix it up, and use that to backfill. And that's a very easy way of doing it. A third of your soil, a third of compost, and a third of perlite. It's a great way to do it. Now, if it's a sandy soil, we might say a third of peat moss and a third of compost and a third of your sandy soil. So it just depends on, again, the situation that you're in. So that's a great way to do it. Now, if you're doing your entire landscape or if you're doing it a whole bed, then you can work all that soil in at one time. You can just go and dump a pile of compost across, dump a bunch of perlite across, and then you can just work that into your soil, and that way your entire planting bed is ready to be planted in. But if you want to kind of save a little bit of money or save a little bit of time, you can just do each hole. So every time you plant a tree, a shrub, or a perennial, you can just amend that hole. What we recommend doing is digging a little bit of a bigger hole, so digging a little bit of a bigger hole, and then so it's wider but no deeper. So you don't want to dig it too deep. You want to dig it the same depth as your root ball. You don't want to bury your plants. That's kind of the way to certainly hurt a plant over time. Is those little small roots on the top surface of that root ball is how it's going to get its nutrients and how it's going to breathe. And if you put a bunch of soil on top of that, it can hurt the plant over time. So we want to plant it level with the ground. In fact, if anything, I always plant mine just a little bit above grade, and then backfill with that good mix of your soil, compost, and perlite is what we're always going to recommend. So that's a very easy way of planting shrubs. Now, if you're planting in containers, earth boxes, pots, whatever you might be planting in, if it's above ground, you definitely want to use a potting soil. So potting soils are by name for pots. You can use potting soils in the soil, but we don't really recommend it because all potting soils have a wetting agent in it. And wetting agents are going to hold moisture in and bring moisture in. And if you're working in a clay soil, it's typically not recommended that you bring moisture in. Clay, if you've ever worked with clay, you're going to know that clay soils can hold moisture for a very long time. They also can dry out, and when they dry out, they're as hard as a brick and will stay hard for a very long time. So we definitely are going to recommend a potting soil when growing anything in a container. We have two great ones here, McDonald Natural Organic Potting Soil, and then we've got our all-purpose potting soil. Potting soils, like I mentioned before, are basically a blend of compost, vermiculite, perlite, peat moss. Again, all these things mixed together are going to create this really nice, rich soil. And then they might throw a fertilizer in there or a wetting agent. Ours just have a little bit of a wetting agent in there. Our natural, basically the difference between an all-purpose potting soil and a natural and organic potting soil, at least with ours, is the wetting agent. The wetting agent on the all-purpose is a little bit more on the synthetic side, and then the natural and organic is an aloe wetting agent. So it's going to hold a little bit more moisture. So I always tell people, if you're looking at our soil, which is always a great deal, it's $9.99. Buy two, get one free all the time, so it's a great deal all the time. It's a 1 cubic foot bag, so for $20 you can get 3 cubic feet of soil. But if you're using natural organic, it's a great potting soil for outside. All-purpose is a great potting soil for inside. All-purpose dries out a little bit easier, so indoor plants, you don't deal with the evaporation and the sun exposure that you're going to get outside. So all-purpose we definitely recommend inside or for containers that you're planting in the shade. But our natural and organic potting soil is great for tomatoes, vegetables, anything like that, but also great for any other container, and it helps, and it kind of holds in a little bit more moisture. So if you've got a container that's out in full blazing sun and you don't want to have to water as frequently, natural and organic potting soil is going to hold a little bit more moisture. There's garden soils. So if you're looking at a garden soil is not a potting soil. So if you're not purchasing your soil from us, we don't sell a garden soil per se. We always are going to recommend the compost and perlite mixture. So that's what we're going to kind of recommend to amend your soil. But if you buy a garden soil, just know that it's not a potting soil. Garden soils are much heavier and thicker, and they're going to clog up the drain holes in your pots. Typically, and they're going to cause your plant to drown a little bit, the root system to drown. So garden soils are used to amend your soil. Again, kind of the same idea. It usually should be a mix of compost and perlite, might have some vermiculite and peat moss in it as well. But that's what a garden soil is. And then there's other soils. We carry a raised bed mix. So if you just want a pre-made mix, it's going to be a little bit thicker for your raised beds, your raised gardens, your raised flower beds. Then this you can buy just to fill up your raised beds. It's going to be a little bit more chunkier, it's going to be a little bit thicker, and it's going to help hold some moisture in. So that's another different type of product that you can get. Of course, you can make your own soil. So a lot of people are doing vegetable gardening right now. It's very, very popular. Unfortunately, we're stuck at home, but it's a very rewarding process to grow your own food. And so a lot of people are doing raised beds or doing taking a plot of their landscape or their yard and growing vegetables in it. And so what I want to talk about is if you want to make your own soil. So let's say you go to the hardware store and you buy a bunch of wood and make a raised bed, or you purchase a raised bed from here or online or somewhere, and you want to make your own soil because you got a lot of square footage that you now have to fill all these raised beds with soil. Then you can do that. We sell bulk. So at our Independence location, you can also purchase it at the Great Neck location for delivery, but at our Independence store, you can call in a delivery, or you can come and pick it up if you have a truck. But you can buy bulk soil, so you can get a scoop of topsoil, a scoop of compost, buy a couple bales of peat moss, buy a bag of perlite. We can help you make your own soil. So if you bring in your dimensions, or you call us and you tell us your dimensions of your flower beds or of your raised beds, we can actually help you fill those up and get the right amount of soil. So what we'll need to know is your length and your width, and then the height that you want to go. And typically I say if you've got a raised bed that's 10 inches high, you typically are going to want to fill about 8 to 9 inches. So you've got a little bit of an edge there that will hold the soil in, so you don't want to fill it all the way to the top and have it coming over the sides, same as you would do in a pot. So that's how you can make your own soil, and we can help you with that. We can help you through the entire process. It's a great way to do it. Topsoil, compost, peat moss, perlite, maybe some vermiculite, but the peat moss is going to help fluffen it up, the perlite's going to break it up, and then you've got your base with the compost and topsoil. I wouldn't recommend just growing in straight compost. So a lot of people do that. They'll plant, do a raised bed, put straight compost in the raised bed. The problem with compost by itself is that compost is decomposing and it heats up. So if you have a big pile of compost sitting there, if you went to where our packaging plant is that makes the compost for us, those composts can heat up to 140 to 160 degrees. So it can heat up and get really, really hot. And you don't want your root system sitting in that very, very hot soil because it'll dry it out very quickly. Compost can actually get very muddy over time and kind of thick and hold up way too much moisture in. So you've always got to use kind of a mixture. We definitely recommend that. Whether you're planting in the ground or planting in a raised bed, you definitely want to add perlite, vermiculite, compost, all those things together, peat moss to fluffen it up. That's going to give you the best soil. So then a lot of people asking about composting this year. Composting is very important. Obviously it helps reduce our landfill waste. This could be its own class by itself about how to do composting, but I want to keep it kind of simple. You can buy composters, the ones that you can turn over and over throughout the year. You've got the bag composters. You can build a bin for it. There's lots of different ways to do it, but again, if you kind of want to just start trying it, my best suggestion is just to form a pile somewhere in your yard, especially if you can kind of keep it hidden away. You can put the fence around, you can get that wire metal fencing and just use that if you want to, or you can just do a pile. It doesn't have to be super, super scientific or super specific. I like to use grass clippings and leaves and some old branches, chop them up. The better that you are about chopping things up, the faster it'll decompose. And then you can throw, banana peels and eggshells and all your leftover vegetable scraps and stuff like that into it. It's a great thing. You can do meat. We don't recommend it. Meat will get stinky over time and start to smell. And then it can also encourage, raccoons or rats or mice and stuff like that to come in. So you definitely don't want to do that because you'll be encouraging other animals to come in there when they smell that meat. But you can decompose a lot of different things. The best thing is not to use oils or fats and stuff like that and grease. But you definitely can decompose a lot of different things, and you can do that with worms. So you can buy red wigglers. We carry red wigglers. We have some worm composting systems that just came in that are just amazing. So you can use those. There's lots of different ways of doing compost, but again, if you just want to start trying, then find a place in your yard, hidden somewhere, maybe behind a shed or back in the far left corner or right corner, somewhere in your yard that you can kind of put it. Just start a pile and just start building it up. If you want to make compost faster, you can get a compost starter, which basically we sell an Espoma compost starter. And what that's going to do is have a lot of beneficial microbes that are going to go in there and help decompose that compost a little bit faster and help that composting process start a little bit quicker. So you can do that very easily. You can do layers. It's super, super easy. The most important thing that I'll tell people is if it's starting to get a little too wet and a little maybe stinky, then you want to add some organic matter, meaning the leaves and the grass clippings and branches and maybe newspaper or filters or other things that you might have. So you can use those things to kind of help thicken it up a little bit and take some of that moisture out. And then if it's a little bit on the drier side, it doesn't seem to be decomposing, you might need some more green stuff or water. you can always just add water. Water will help kind of the decomposition process a little bit. And then turn it every so often. So you're going to want to turn it about every 2 to 3 weeks. You can do it weekly, but just going out there with a pitchfork or a shovel and just going there and turning it gets air in there. And when you get the air in there, and with the combination of the moisture, the decomposition process will be a little bit quicker. So those are some great ideas on how to do composting. Usually a 3x3, 4x4 size area is all you really need, and just start the process. And if you've already planted and then you get the compost later, compost is a great way to just add kind of a top dressing on the top of your soil. You can just add it right around your vegetable plants and your flower beds and stuff like that. You don't want to do it too thick. You only want to do about 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, but you don't want to do it too thick. But what that will do is help the nutrients kind of work their way down through the soil over time. And it'll add a little bit of a fertilizer as well as that decomposition process continues. So those are kind of some different things there. I'll talk about lawns real briefly. Lawns, again, we're talking about soil, we're talking about pH. There's lots of different lawns that you can do in this area. From Bermuda to Zoysia, St. Augustine, centipede are your summer grasses, and then you've got fescue in the fall. A lot of times when we teach our lawn classes and lawn seminars, which that could be another one that we could do, we're going to talk about pH again, the importance of pH. Get your pH in the right range so that we can get the best use out of our fertilizer, and it also encourages less weeds in your lawn because the pH is right. So and then of course organic matter is what I always talk about in lawn classes. Again, our soil is depleted a little bit of that organic richness and that organic matter. So it's very important to put down a layer of compost whenever you're seeding. That really helps. Again, it doesn't have to be too thick. It only needs to be about 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch, and then you're good to go. So that compost is, again, going to work its way into the soil, add organic matter, and enrich your soil. And you don't have to go through and till your yard, especially when you're doing lawns. If you're working in a flower vegetable garden or something like that, and you want to till it up, that's fine. But in the lawn, when you till up your lawn, you're flipping the soil. And so that soil way down deep has a lot of weed seeds in it that can't germinate at the current level it's in. So when you flip the soil and you bring those weed seeds up, you're going to get a lot of stuff growing, some prehistoric looking stuff sometimes. So it's important that if you need to till your yard in order to start a lawn, to wait a little bit, wait for the weeds to germinate, then kill those off, and then you can start from scratch. Again, if you've got hills or valleys and you need to fill those in, just topsoil, just filling it out with topsoil, and then putting a level of compost over the top really helps enrich that soil. So again, lawns, soil is key. Soil is key in everything that we plant. And so that's what I want to talk about last is our soil pyramid. I think this kind of helps bring it all together and kind of it's a new thing that we're kind of talking about is our soil pyramid. And at the base of the pyramid, what kind of holds the pyramid up is your soil. And that's the soil amendments again. You've got your soil. It's important to use your soil and keep your soil, but it's important to amend it with compost, perlite, vermiculite, peat moss. Bring in a soil sample. Let us do a pH test. Let us get your soil right. Know your soil. Know if it's a sandy soil. Know if it's a clay-based soil when you come in here, because that'll help us kind of help you get the right amendments for that soil. I mean, some people, I love the tag on every plant. It says, this plant prefers moist, well-drained, rich soil. Well, of course, every plant would love that, but we can help you get that. Our soil just naturally isn't that typically, and so you're not going to get that just naturally. We want to encourage that through the compost, perlite, vermiculite mixture. So that's what we always recommend. So that's the base of your pyramid, is your soil and compost and soil amendments and all those different things that you can add to the soil to make your soil better. So that's the base of the pyramid. Now the middle part of the pyramid is fertilizer. So you're going to be adding these nutrients. So as I mentioned, getting your pH right, make sure that it can use these nutrients. Of course, we've got our own McDonald green leaf fertilizer. We've got it in our traditional form and our green leaf or organic formula. And those are great fertilizers for this area. They're specifically designed for Hampton Roads. So they've got the major macronutrients, as I call them, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And then they've got the micronutrients as well. Boron, copper, zinc, magnesium, iron, all these different smaller trace elements that you need in our soil. We know our soil is lacking those, so we put them in our fertilizer. But you can use lots of different other types of fertilizers. We carry a lot of different ones, especially if you want to get specific If you want to fertilize a Japanese maple, like the one behind me, you can use, Japanese maple food. We've also got all the Espoma products, so if you're planting and just growing tomatoes in your vegetable bed, and you want to just fertilize your tomatoes, we've got Espoma organic tomato food, tomato tone. So you can use that to get very specific, and that just gives exactly what the tomato needs. And then we've got lots of other types of fertilizers that you can use. Liquid fertilizers, indoor houseplant fertilizers, but fertilizers are that middle part of the pyramid. It's what the plant needs. You're going to give it to it. And then we'll recommend on what time frames to give that to. Typically, you're fertilizing vegetables a little bit heavier, but then you're going to fertilize the trees and shrubs and perennials probably 2 or 3 times a year. And then again, lawns are a different subject too. But fertilizer is kind of that middle part of that component. So then the top one is a newer kind of thing that's been starting with this whole organic gardening trend, is the soil microbes and these beneficial bacteria. So these are little microorganisms called mycorrhizae, bacillus, bacterias, that actually attach themselves to the root system of the plant. And they form a symbiotic relationship that can last the entire lifetime of the plant. So it's a great little thing that happens in the soil, and that's at the top point of the pyramid, that we recommend doing that. And you can get that with our Espoma Biotone Starter Plus. It's a great starter fertilizer. Anytime you plant any plant, we recommend it, especially vegetable plants, herbs, any of those different types of things. But it's going to form that relationship with the root system, and basically what it's going to do is it's going to help with a sugar transfer. It wants the sugar, the plant doesn't need the sugar, and then it's going to give it nutrients, and it's going to help build that root system, and it's going to explode that root system. So again, as we kind of learn more and more about our soil and what we can add to the soil, these things have been there, they're there, we're just encouraging it, and we can give it to you so that you can put it right directly in the soil. So that's our soil pyramid, is from the top down. The bottom is the strongest part, the base. You gotta amend your soil. We definitely recommend the compost, the perlite, vermiculite, peat moss. As I've discussed, soil amendments are super, super important. And then fertilizer is what you're gonna add. We know you're gonna fertilize. It's just doing it at the right time, making sure your pH is right so that the plant can get to that fertilizer. And then at the very top is the new soil microbes, the beneficial bacteria, the mycorrhizae, that are gonna help kind of bring it all together and help everything just kind of live for a long time. And that's how you can be very successful in your garden. So let's see if I've got any questions. I see some things coming up there. So Deborah asked, what about a metal trash can? Yes, you could use a metal trash can to do composting. You definitely can. I mean, if you did it indoors, some people do composting indoors. You want to make sure it's a very tight fitting lid, as the smell can increase over time. But indoors, again, it's all about the green waste and the brown waste is what I call it. The green waste is going to be all your vegetables. They have lots of moisture in it. So think banana peels, lettuce leftovers, onions, all those different things that you might be putting in there. Your vegetable scraps are going to have a lot of moisture in them and are going to break down and release moisture. And so you need the brown material, basically your newspaper, your leaf clippings, your grass clippings, different things like that that are going to help kind of thicken that mixture up, to help absorb that moisture. And they kind of work together to release nitrogen and release carbon to help that kind of decomposition process continue. And then Patricia has a great point. You can drill holes in it. So you definitely could. You could drill holes in it and keep it outside. Then you wouldn't want to do it inside. But you could keep it outside and drill holes in it, and that helps with the airflow in it. So that's a great suggestion. And then, so Denise said, I find my raised beds get compacted and feel maybe the plants can't root well. Great point. So yeah, if you've had raised beds over time and they've gotten compacted, or you feel like your soil is compacted, then now is the time to amend that soil. And to fluffen it up is going to be your compost, because it's going to be thicker. What's happened is your raised bed mix that you probably created a while ago has decomposed more and become thicker and become closer to that topsoil level. And so when you get closer to that topsoil level, it thickens up and becomes compacted over time. And then it isn't a great thing to grow in. So you want to encourage that you want to fluffen it up. That's why I always say, you want to kind of make it a lighter mix. And compost is going to do that. Peat moss is going to help, especially in raised beds. Raised beds can tend to dry out a little bit more. So I always recommend peat moss because it helps hold that moisture in. Perlite is going to break up the soil, allow the root system to get oxygen into the roots, all those good things. So I would say get some perlite, some compost, some peat moss, fluffing up your soil. You've got the base, you've got the soil part of it, you just need to amend it. And then vermiculite is used in what soil? So vermiculite, again, I typically recommend it for a little bit more of a sandier soil, or a soil that doesn't that drains well or dries out real well. Vermiculite is very similar to perlite, helps break up the soil, helps water get down through the root system, helps oxygen get down there, all those good things. But vermiculite can actually absorb some more moisture than perlite. Perlite doesn't hold a lot of moisture in. Perlite's really for our clay-based soils. It helps get the water that gets, can get into a clay soil and stay there for a long time. Perlite's going to help get that water out. Vermiculite is going to help kind of hold some moisture in, but it acts very similar to perlite. So it's kind of a toss-up. I typically am going to recommend vermiculite for more sandy soils, and then perlite for more of our heavy clay-based soils. And then D says, fill in the holes in your yard after you till and let wacky weeds grow. So, yep. So we've got, so let's see. So fill in holes in your yard after you till and let wacky weeds grow. Kill them. Then place seeds down and cover those with some sort of compost. So yes, so if you are, if you're going to till, then what you're going to do is you're going to bring those weed seeds back up to germination level. If they haven't been there for a long time, you're going to get some stuff growing. Then you can kill those. You can kill them off with our Killzall. We've also got organic ways to kill them. So you've got a couple different options there, a traditional or an organic way to kill off your weeds that grow, because they're going to grow up and they're going to be big and they're going to be aggressive. They've been laying dormant for a long time. Kill those off and then put down a nice thin layer of compost. Drop your seed on top is typically what I recommend. If you put your seed below the compost, you can do that, but it does kind of take a little bit longer to germinate. So I recommend putting a thin layer of compost, dropping my seed, maybe taking a light leaf rake, like a metal leaf rake, and just raking over it real lightly, just to kind of help mesh that seed with that soil really well. And then you're ready to start watering and get your new grass to grow. So great question. So thank you, Denise. I'm glad you enjoyed the class. So have 4x4 pyramid planter. Do I use garden or potting soil? If it's a planter, it's got drainage holes, it's a enclosed container, then you want to use a potting soil for sure. If it's a raised bed, you can use just potting soil. But if it's a 4x4 pyramid planter, my guess is it's got holes in it that's going to allow the water to come through and percolate through, and you definitely need to use a potting soil. If you use a garden soil, it's going to become too thick, too fast. Over time, it's going to clog up those holes, your drain holes, and the moisture is going to sit in there. And it's like standing in a bathtub all day long. Your feet are going to rot off. Same thing for plants. If they sit in moisture all day long, once there's plants there are plants that do love a lot of moisture, but if it's not that type of plant, you want to use a potting soil. That's what's going to encourage the water to go through the soil and work its way down and allow fertilizer and moisture and the oxygen to get to the root system. So potting soils are super important when you're growing in containers. So there's kind of the basic. So I don't see any more questions. Let's see, do I have any more? Is tilling the same as core aeration, or is this different? Great question. Tilling is different than core aeration. You wouldn't probably do both. Core aeration you do when you want to encourage the soil to loosen over time and without disturbing the top surface. So you can actually aerate an existing lawn and not damage the lawn too bad. Whereas tilling is going to till up the entire soil. So if you're redoing your entire lawn, you're doing a brand new lawn, you might consider tilling. Again, I don't recommend it, but if you're looking to regrade everything, you can do that. But you can do it with just using topsoil to fill in those hills and valleys. Core aeration is a little bit different. Core aeration is those little plugs that they pull out. You might see it on golf courses, or you've seen your neighbor do it before. Core aeration is good. You can do that. You don't have to do it though. A lot of people recommend it, and you can do it. I don't recommend doing it every year. If you're going to do it, you might do it every 3 or 4 years. And it's really for very, very compacted soils. And what it does is it pulls a little plug out, and it lays it on the top surface. That's going to break apart. And then those holes are actually going to fill in with the soil around it. So what you're going to get is that loosening of the soil. And that's what aeration is. But you can get aeration naturally through compost. Again, compost is like my favorite thing. Just by putting a thin layer of compost over the soil, that's naturally going to break down, decompose, work your way into the soil, and that's just as good as aeration. If you did compost every year or every other year, you're going to see an amazing benefit to your lawn. The success rate's going to go way up. Again, it's organic matter, and that's what our soil lacks, is that organic matter. So really appreciate that comment. There's a big difference between core aeration and tilling, so great question. And so Heidi's contacted me back and she said, it has no bottom. The 4x4 planter is basically just a frame to hold dirt. Still would recommend potting soil. It sounds like it's above ground. It's pretty contained. So definitely recommend potting soil in your situation. We're here for you guys. We want to be here. We want to continue to educate you. thank you for tuning in to our first Facebook Live webinar educational series. We're going to continue to do this. We appreciate you listening. I know soil kind of sounds boring, but now's a great time to think about it. It's a little early for vegetable plants. It's a little bit early to start really getting out. We're still going to experience some cool nights. April 10th is our frost date. So once we get to next week, I think we're going to be okay. But you got to watch your temperatures. So be careful with cucumbers and squash and zucchini. It's a little early for that stuff. Peppers, tomatoes, even a little bit maybe too early. But I know we're itching to get out there. So it's a great time to think about your soil and get working on that. So start thinking about working your vegetable garden, getting your planters ready for your annual flowers. We've got our a week-long event next, or our extended event, our Pedal Power event next week. I think that's our Pedal Power Spring Sale is April 10th through 14th. So we've extended it to allow you more time to come in. Remember, we're practicing social distancing here. We want to be super, super safe for you and for all our customers. So we hope to see you. Come in and see us. We're here for you. We're here to educate and continue to do this. If you ever have any questions, give us a call, email us. You can get us through Facebook, Messenger. You can get us through a lot of different ways. We're out there. We're communicating. We're talking. We want to be here for you, and we want to support you. So thanks for tuning in. We'll continue to do this, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.